and then Julien will take over to moderate the rest of the session. Everything fine, Julien?
Yes, so
yes.
right.
And I can see you. Camera is perfect.
Okay,
so
now
live.
Now it's 3:03. I think we agree on that, at least Danish time. And I will kick off this session here with a short introduction. And this session about people and housing. It's a very relevant theme, of course, crossroads of energy poverty and failing supply chains. As we discussed a little bit earlier on before we started the meeting here, we have a new government in the Danish context, and one of the things there is help to the Danish households because of the high energy prices. That's one of the things, the main things right now here also in the Danish context. But I will start with a little presentation here about Housing Europe. My name is Bent Mersner. I'm president of Housing Europe. And when we look at Housing Europe, it's the organization for the social, affordable, and cooperative housing organizations all over Europe. 43,000 local housing organizations in 25 countries and almost 55 million dwellings all over Europe. And what we are doing on a yearly basis is that we produce new dwellings, about 200,000 dwellings, and refurbishment of the dwellings. And here, of course, is also refurbishment about the energy. When we are refurbishing the building envelope, of course, we reduce the use of energy, which is very good because of the high energy prices. But of course, we also have high interest rates right now, so we have to make cost-efficient renovations, which is very important because we do not want to make renovations which increase the rents. And what we are looking into right now is, of course, a risk of evictions all over Europe. Before we had this crisis here, we were talking about energy poverty, and of course, with the high inflation rate and with the high energy prices, the situation is much more severe than it was 1 or 2 years ago. So we are all over Europe and have a lot of activity. And what we are also doing here is when there are shocks to the economy, and we had the financial crisis, and what we are doing here, people are living maybe the higher end of the housing market, and we have to absorb people in our end of the housing market to prevent homelessness, and of course, as I said before, prevent evictions. And when we had the COVID pandemic, we had all over Europe, much was done in our housing organizations all over Europe, and what we did was to try to support people and also had eviction bans because many people unfortunately could not pay their rents. And what we're looking into now, as I said, high inflation, high energy prices, and what can we do now and how long will it last? And we are looking into that today, and we have a lot of discussions about the energy and how to reduce the energy by insulating and about refurbishment. And we have to, as I said before, we have to look into this balance between investment in reducing the use of energy and also the cost of the investment, so we have cost-efficient solutions. So this is what we are doing and what we're looking into right now. And we have Europe with a crisis, economic crisis, but we also have Europe with a war going on, which we could even imagine a year ago, or when it started the 24th of February. It was a shock to all of us. And what we are looking into now is how can we help Ukraine? And we have a lot of refugees from Ukraine, and we try to house refugees also, and mainly many places in our housing stock. And what can we possibly do to house people from Ukraine in great need? And what we are also looking into right now is hopefully this war will stop at sometimes sooner, hopefully than later, and we have to rebuild Ukraine and help to rebuild Ukraine. And when we look into Ukrainian housing market, what Ukraine do not have is a cooperative and a social housing sector. So we also have close connections with the Ukrainian government right now to try to have the knowledge and the know-how and inspire to create an affordable housing sector in Ukraine, which would be very, very, in our view, would be very, very important for the years to come. So with these words as an introduction, I will end this and say that we should have a very good, and it's a very important conference here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bent. And we're going to hear now from the European Commission on what measures are being taken around energy prices. So thank you very much for tuning in from Copenhagen on such a busy day for you.
And thank you to all of you for joining here today. Bye-bye from me.
Okay, well, good afternoon. My name is John Taylor. I work for the European Commission. I work in the part of the Commission that is responsible for consumer affairs. So I don't pretend to come to this roundtable with great insights about specifically about housing, but consumer organizations have been getting very busy of late on all sorts of issues relating to the energy crisis. And we don't really call it an energy crisis anymore. It's more of a cost of living crisis. And what I would like just to share with you this afternoon, just for a few minutes, is some of the areas that we are looking at to see how we can make things a little bit better, or at least less bleak in the coming months. Everybody recognizes, and it's already started, at least here in Belgium, the cold winter. And even if the situation here in Europe, in Western Europe, is a lot more comfortable than what we know is going on in the Ukraine, we do feel that we need to do something for our citizens, our consumers, to try and make the situation a little bit less difficult. And so what started as an energy crisis a few months ago really has developed into an economic crisis for a lot of our consumers or citizens. Traditionally, we would be maybe most concerned about what we would call vulnerable categories of consumers, whether it's because they're on low incomes or no incomes, or because they have disabilities or various medical conditions. But we find when we look at the situation a little bit more in detail now, we're not so, well, we're always concerned about these categories, but we feel that they are already being looked after to an extent by existing measures that are in place. And what we're finding now is that more and more people are getting into difficulties that would not normally be in trouble. So that we're looking more at the low to middle income families across Europe who are finding trouble paying their bills. It may have started where they suddenly get faced with an enormous electricity bill or a gas bill, but these bills are so high that it has a very clear knock-on effect to other bills for example, paying their rent. And as time goes by, the whole thing comes to a halt. They are unable to pay any of their bills. And this leads them into all sorts of difficult situations. We've also found that when we put out, when I say we, I mean the Commission to an extent, but mostly national authorities and consumer organizations, when they've been putting out messages about reducing energy consumption, quite often it might be the older people who take most note of those kinds of informations. And it's the old people that then turn off their heaters at home. And then that leads up to other difficulties, because they're the category of people that we would hope would keep their heaters on in the winter and stay fit and healthy. So the information campaigns that we're pushing out, they have a very direct impact on the type of customers or constituents that Housing Europe has to look at, because it has such a big effect on households. So we've been looking, as I said, starting off specific at energy issues. And if you look at what the Commission has been doing, it's made some very big gestures with the member states, which have led in many countries to capping of energy prices, and also all sorts of ways of subsidizing and helping consumers with lower rates of due, excise or VAT on supplies and so on. But we've seen recently that this is still not really enough. So the Commission is trying to act as a bit of a facilitator between the different actors in this environment. You have the energy suppliers, you have the consumers, and then a raft of other, let's say, stakeholders in the middle, like the energy regulators and so on. And because the way the EU institutions work, if the Commission was to make a proposal that would be legally binding on the member states, it could take maybe 2 years for it to work its way through the system. We appreciate that is not appropriate for this situation. So rather than making, let's say, legal proposals or recommendations, we've tried to facilitate the stakeholders coming to some kind of consensus that will help households across Europe in the coming months. So we've have an initiative going on at the moment about enhanced protection for consumers this winter. And I think the representatives of Housing Europe were present at a round table that we organised at the start of November. So it's about the 7th of November. We brought together all sorts of people, like the energy service providers, the regulators, but also other associations like consumer organisations at the EU level, to sit around the table and actually try to work out what could be done that would be helpful to everybody without anybody being, let's say, too exposed. One of the arguments put forward by the energy providers or the suppliers is that if you provide too much protection to the consumer, for example, you make a cap on the price that the supplier can charge for the energy, whether it's electricity or gas, this would actually have a financial impact that could be very detrimental to the supplier. Another argument would be that if you don't encourage the consumer to reduce demand, we're also not meeting maybe our longer term objectives of related to the green transition and the overall ambition to actually reduce energy consumption. So it was a tricky balance, but we had a round table around the 7th of November. The Commission services continued to discuss bilaterally with some of the players. We also participated in what is called the Energy Forum. So it's an annual event held in Dublin this year, where we also met with a lot of the, let's say, the representatives at the EU level related to energy. And then we held even more, let's say, exchanges back in Brussels after that event in Dublin. And this all led, and this is the sort of the news for you, this all led to a high-level event just at the start of this week, so on Monday, where we managed to get some of the important European associations to actually sign a declaration that should help the situation for consumers this winter. So if you haven't heard about it yet, and it is fairly fresh, you can Google that quite easily. It's available on the Commission website, whether it's the DG Justice part of the Commission or the DG Energy. But it relates to a document that a lot of the main players have signed up to, which talks about solidarity with all citizens in Europe, where we talk about trying to put forward a targeted approach to help the consumers. So we're not looking to just, for example, reduce the cost of energy across the board. We're trying to help the people that are in need, whilst recognizing that those in need are not necessarily the most obvious categories of people. And in that context, we also try to avoid excessive risk to the energy suppliers themselves. And we want to provide a balance of support measures to demand reduction. So those were the guiding principles. And concretely, what would that mean to some of your constituents? It means that we've asked them to look very carefully at how they could defer bills between now and I think March of 2023. So if a consumer cannot pay his bills, that there is mechanisms in place to take account of that. For example, by establishing some kind of payment system so that they can be paid in a longer term. We've asked the suppliers to avoid, where possible, any disconnections over the winter. So that was a fear that a lot of consumers have had, that they would not be able to pay their bills and they would simply be cut off. And over the winter, that could be quite dangerous. Another concrete measure that we've asked them to look at very carefully is to avoid making unilateral changes to contracts. So again, this is something that we've seen reported to us over the last few months, that energy suppliers who had maybe fixed price contracts with their consumers have suddenly just changed the terms of the contracts because they're claiming that the cost of the energy they're supplying is now maybe even tripled. Now, as a consumer affairs policy officer, I would normally say, well, you can't just unilaterally change a contract. But when you look into the small print of EU legislation, there is actually a carve out for energy suppliers. And it may be for good reasons. Price of energy can be very volatile. So it was accepted some time ago that those types of contracts, that there was actually some kind of clause that allowed the suppliers to change the terms. But we've asked at the EU level that suppliers do not just systematically change the contracts across the board, because this also creates more confusion and concern for the consumers. And finally, we've really insisted on the need for better information to the consumers so that households know not just how much they're paying for their energy, but what their alternatives are. And also, we try to cover the situations where consumers are unable to pay their bills, what sort of mitigating possibilities there might be for that household or that consumer. Now, it's a little bit complicated because we're not legislating at the EU level. And when we look across the board, across Europe, some countries are much more developed, let's say, than others in terms of these kinds of measures. We've just heard from Bent up in Copenhagen. In Denmark, I don't think there's any secret there. There is quite a lot of measures in place to help households that are in difficulty. Similarly, we were in Ireland there for the Energy Forum. We took the time there to have a dialogue with the citizens, a consumer dialogue, and it became quite clear there that the Irish were also quite advanced in putting out measures to support consumers in this regard. So, for example, there is a moratorium in Ireland on disconnections, right? That is not something that's legislated at the EU level. It's something that the government there has put in place. Other countries around Europe have not thought to do that or are unable to do it. But this declaration that we've got the European organizations to sign up to, we hope will try to help level the playing field across Europe so that all citizens get that sort of protection, at least for the coming months. So I'd be very happy to talk a little bit more about that if people have questions. But by way of introduction, it's what we're trying to do at the EU level. But I can't hide from anyone here. This is not a legislative measure in place that binds anybody. As I said at the start, the Commission has not got the time to do anything like that. We've put in place some ideas that we've got the European associations to sign up to. Their commitment to that is to get their members to follow along. It may well be that in one or other member state, one or other company, service provider or whatever, may not follow that approach. But we hope with peer pressure and with this sense of solidarity across Europe, that this will actually help at least a little bit the consumers and the households that are in difficulty this winter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John, for that overview. We're now going to get a reminder indeed about the current inflationary climate and the latest figures and forecasts before we go on to the rest of the session. I realize you might have to jump off, but you're going to try to jump back in so that you get a chance to hear from our members. Did I kick it off, Dara?
Thank you very much, Sasha.
Perfect. Perfect, yes. I'm going to try to be brief because unfortunately my presentation today is a little bit downbeat, a little bit gloomy, but it's an important message that has to be shared and a point that has to be hammered home, which is about the current inflationary dynamic. So here in the chart, what we see is the inflation rate just in the Eurozone. I'll come to the individual member states in a moment, but this is just the individual inflation rate in the Eurozone countries. And what you see is that even before the war in Ukraine, inflation was already at about 4 or 5%. Now, when you consider that the European Central Bank has a mandate to keep inflation at close to but below 2%, it means that prior to the war in Ukraine, inflation was already more than double what the ECB's mandate says it has to be. So we were already in a period of very high inflation versus what would be considered a normal inflationary environment. Since the war in Ukraine, obviously we've had increased energy prices, we've had increased supply chain issues, and so on. And what we see is that inflation picked up to 10.6% in October. So again, more than quadruple what would be considered a normal inflationary environment vis-a-vis the ECB and indeed the majority of central banks in Europe. Potentially some small glimmer of hope is that the provisional figures for inflation for November show that inflation in the Eurozone at least decreased very, very slightly to 10%, but still 10% is an incredibly abnormal inflationary environment and simply not something that many low-income households can tolerate. What we see when we look at the breakdown, so what's actually contributing to inflation, we see that in October of 2022, about 32% of the contribution to inflation of 10.6% was coming just from electricity and heating. And for a low-income household in particular, where they spend more of their money on electricity and heating, that effect is going to be even more pronounced. What's also concerning is that food and beverages are accounting for about 28% of inflation. So again, the necessities, the everyday necessities, the food that we need and the heating that we need for our homes is what's being most impacted. What's interesting is that diesel and petrol for cars is now only contributing about 6% to inflation. Whereas if we look back towards the early part of this crisis, we see that the costs of actually getting from A to B, particularly by car transport, was a far greater part of inflation. And then the rest, the other things that aren't food, electricity, heating, or transport, things like everyday services, going to the doctor, going to the cinema, whatever it might be, they account for the rest of inflation, about 34%. So again, what we see is that inflation is incredibly high and that it's become more broad-based over time. Now, that was the Eurozone picture, but what about the individual member state picture? Because again, the Eurozone doesn't necessarily tell us everything that's happening at the individual member state level. This is the inflationary figures for individual European countries in October of 2022, and we see that there's a huge dichotomy. We see a particular dichotomy between countries in Western Europe, or what's usually referred to as Western Europe, and then countries that are in what is usually referred to as Eastern Europe, particularly countries in the Baltic. So we see that Estonia, Lithuania, Hungary, Latvia really make up the most worrying situations where inflation is above 20%, incredibly high level of inflation, incredibly difficult situation for particularly, again, low-income households to tolerate. At the other end of the spectrum, we have countries like Switzerland, France, Spain, Malta, Finland, that have, again, still very, very high levels of inflation, but again, less than half of what it is in the other countries that we already mentioned. And again, that comes down to a number of factors. It comes down to government support programs to try to control energy prices that we heard about a few minutes ago. It also comes to, it comes to the fact that they're not geographically as tied to Russia, for example, or as tied to Ukraine, or maybe that the power that they generate is coming more from hydroelectric, for example, in the case of Switzerland, or from nuclear in the case of France. So again, there's a huge amount of dichotomy. There's a huge amount of pain that's being felt by households across Europe. But as this chart shows, that pain is not necessarily being felt equally right across the continent. This chart is actually quite worrying. It's from a new piece of research from the JRC. And what it shows basically is the expected impact of the current increase in prices on energy poverty across the European Union. So the bars in blue show us what percentage of households were estimated to be living in energy poverty before the crisis. And the chart in orange shows us what the number of households expected to be living in energy poverty are now as a result of the crisis in Europe. And again, we see incredibly worrying figures. In some countries, energy poverty is expected to more than double as a result of the current inflationary climate. At a European level, we're expected to jump from about 3.6% of households living in energy poverty to 8.6% of households living in energy poverty. And again, if you look at the chart, you see that there's a huge dichotomy from relatively low levels of energy poverty in countries like Germany, Luxembourg, Finland, to countries with over 40% energy poverty, like in Lithuania. Unfortunately, to keep the doom and gloom going, we are very much not out of the woods yet, as we say in English. This chart here shows what inflation has been doing in recent years. So we see that between the period 2015 and 2020, inflation basically just didn't happen in Europe. I mean, we went from a situation of very, very, very stable prices to a situation in 2021 where we saw a bit of an increase, and then 2022, it's really been a very sharp jump in prices. So the full year outlook from the European Commission is that in the European Union, inflation or prices will have picked up by 9.3% in 2022. In 2023, a further 7% pickup in prices is expected, and then a further 3% in 2024. And what this tells us is that there is no return to normality. I think many people have got themselves into the impression that, okay, what's happening now is exceptional. It's happening because of supply chain issues. It's happening post-COVID. It's happening because of the war in Ukraine. What the European Commission is telling us with its projections is that, no, that's not the case. The current higher prices have become systemic. So do not expect a correction. Do not expect a return to normal. This is the new normal. Higher prices, higher cost for many everyday services has become systemic and will continue to increase in the coming 2 years. So policymakers need to be working on that basis, that they can't just wait this out. There is no waiting this out. Action is needed to protect vulnerable households from higher prices. Of course, one of the things that we often hear about when we talk about, okay, people are spending too much money to heat their homes, for example. What we need to do is renovate those homes, right? We need to invest more money in renovation to make sure that people have warmer homes, better quality homes. But what we look at when we look at the actual cost of construction and renovation is that the cost of construction and renovation is basically higher than it's been in many, many decades. What you see in this chart here is the outlook that's coming from the construction sector itself. It's a monthly survey from the European Commission, which basically asks people who work in the construction sector how much they expect basic things, insulation, cement, you name it, to be over the coming 3 months. We see that, again, going all the way back to even the mid-80s, those expectations have never been so bleak. So yes, we need to renovate homes, but the cost of renovating homes effectively has never been higher. So again, I'm very, very sorry to have maybe had a very gloomy presentation, but again, it contains a lot of very important messages for policymakers that they need to act, that they can't just wait this out, that this is not kind of a temporary blip, and the real supports are needed to make sure people have better quality homes and that they can afford to heat their homes, for example, at prices that are within their means. So I'm going to pass over to my colleague Julian now, who hopefully will give us some more words of encouragement and inspiration about what type of measures can be taken to actually make sure that that's achievable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dara. And indeed, it was very necessary, although not necessarily pleasant, but to have a view about the expectation for the coming year and beyond. And indeed, a challenging context for the social housing providers in Europe, whereby they will have to face the long-term one, which is indeed related to the climate change mitigation and the decarbonization of the building stock, but also the short-term one, which is in relation to the energy crisis and the emergency measures that they have to put in place in order to protect as much as they can tenants. And it is exactly what we're going to discuss now with a series of presentation. First made by colleagues from Union Sociale pour l'Habitat and the University of Delft, Johan Philippe and Tijn Kroon. They're going to explain to us exactly what kind of measures have been put in place by the national governments, and also what kind of measures have been put in place by social housing providers in order to face the current challenges, which, as we heard from Dara, might continue actually quite a bit in the future. So I'm going to give the floor to Johan and Tijn, sorry, and thank you already for being with us.
Thank you, Julien, for your introduction. So, as you mentioned, I'm Johan Philippe, currently a researcher at the French Federation of Social Housing, l'Union Sociale pour l'Habitat. Maybe you want to...
Yeah, sure. My name is Tijn Kroon. I'm a PhD candidate at the TU Delft in the Netherlands, part of the Readwell research group, and currently seconded at Housing Europe for another week and a half.
So let us start with. So you may observe in this through this graph that most countries have released support packages to help tenants face the crisis and the sharp increase in energy bills. So we observed that the amount allocated differs greatly across countries. even if we take into account the GDP share, and with the highest national package delivered by Germany. So the main objective of this package is to act as a buffer with regard to the increase in wholesale energy prices in Europe and to support consumers. If we look now at this chart, we see that around September 2021, the TTF gas prices started to increase. And so as a response, member states started to lower taxation on energy for the entire country population, and others rather decided to extend the social tariffs. Then later on, around December 2021, member states added more social measures with direct financial support and different conditionalities across countries to benefit from those measures. More recently, discussions have been more focused on energy price caps, so including either gas or electricity or both, depending on the countries. And also at the EU level, with energy ministers working on finding a consensus for a European-wide price cap. So windfall taxes are also a more recent addition, which aim to cope with the fact that some energy suppliers are making important benefits from the crisis. So of course, here we are only depicting some trends, and this may fluctuate across countries, but it gives an overview, a great sense of the different support instruments that have been implemented. So entering a bit more in detail, we identify mainly two categories of policies put forward by governments and which directly impact households. So there are more social measures and measures to limit the energy consumption. So first, looking at the more social measures, some countries provide direct financial support, so to help the households cope with the increasing energy bills. And this include energy checks and one-time payments, which have been implemented in most countries. Benefiting from this support may be dependent on the household composition, the energy source that you're using to heat your place, or the location of your accommodation, for example. So we also observed that the amount delivered by governments may vary greatly across countries, which is partly correlated to the different inflation rates. So other measures include income support, so which 2/3 of countries have combined with support measures such as tax cuts. And more specifically, income support measures may include wage indexation, so such as in Belgium, meaning that your wage is indexed to the cost of living in the country. And so increase in minimum wage, which aims at helping to combat the risk that the lower income households fall into poverty because of the rising energy prices, have also been implemented, for example, in the Netherlands. So lastly, there are measures that aim at avoiding evictions by providing financial assistance, so as it is the case in Austria. There in Austria, the government has a program that was developed during the COVID-19 pandemic, but has been extended since the energy crisis. And so it aims at helping to prevent tenants from being evicted by covering the outstanding housing debts. So if we keep in mind the chronology that we aforementioned, the main tool currently advocated by member states to reduce the energy bills is the price cap. So EU member states have put in place a different mechanism according to their energy mix to cap the price of energy. So Portugal and Spain benefit from the so-called Iberian exception, so which caps the price of gas for electricity production and has been enabled by the Commission. However, it appears that it has not resulted in incentives for consumers to lower the consumption, but more the contrary, it would have led to higher consumption. And so then you have another type of price cap, so which aims at freezing the price of gas to the price pre-crisis. So in France, the bouclier tarifaire freezes the gas price to the one that was set in October 2021. And in 2023, the increase in energy prices will be limited to 15%. But however, even if the government said that collective heating is covered by such a measure, it is actually only partially the case, and social housing providers have been confronted to energy increases up to 1100%. Then you have price breaks, so that you find more in Austria, Germany, or the Netherlands, and so where gas or electricity or both are kept to a certain consumption volume. And so this mechanism shows a bit more equity than price cap that apply to the entirety of households' consumption, because higher income households usually consume more than lower incomes households, and so they have to pay the market price if they want to consume more. And so that also acts as an incentive to lower the consumption. And lastly, you have some countries that did not provide a national price cap, and some rather advocate for a European one, like in Belgium. So looking at measures that aim at limiting energy consumption, we see that most of the countries put forward communication campaigns. So a more non-constraining approach. And in these communication campaigns, they promote so energy sobriety tips in order to secure energy supply for the winter. And so these are heavily based on providing advice to the population. And on average, countries estimate that it can trigger a diminution of 10% in energy consumption. For example, France has really recently registered a reduction of 8.3% in energy consumption compared to last year at the same period. And so here you have some examples. So Mission 11 in Austria, Chaque Geste Compte in France, and maybe my colleague can pronounce the Dutch one, because I wouldn't know how.
That's Zet de knop om.
So now I will leave you pursue with.
Yeah, so now Joanna has given an overview of what European governments have done in the last year and a half to mitigate the effects of the energy crisis. We also wanted to share some criticism of this response, especially regarding the untargeted nature of these measures. Take the OECD that studied almost 300 of these measures, which add up to 250 billion euros spent between October 2021 and now, basically. Their conclusion was that most of these measures had been untargeted, meaning that there were no eligibility conditions in place. Only a small minority of measures was actually targeted, meaning that support was provided to specific groups based on income, household composition, or housing conditions. Income support measures were more targeted than price support measures, which is illustrated in the bar chart on the right. And therefore, the OECD advises governments to shift to more targeted measures, which may even require transforming social welfare systems. Now, you might wonder what's so bad about an untargeted government measure in this context. Unfortunately, institutions like the OECD, the World Bank, and the IMF have explained their thinking. And they argue that untargeted support can be environmentally unsustainable because universal price support reduces the incentive for all to lower energy consumption. Basically, governments then also subsidize private swimming pools or saunas, which is not ideal when supply is tight. It can also be regressive since high-income households generally use more energy than low-income households. Therefore, untargeted support allocates more subsidy to the rich than to the poor. Central banks have warned that untargeted measures cause inflation in a time when inflationary pressures are already very high, as Dara showed at the beginning of this webinar. And finally, price support only accounts for a short-term fix, while long-term approaches such as accelerated renovation structurally improve livelihoods. But we don't want to paint a one-sided picture, and there are also quite some disadvantages of narrowly targeted support. First and foremost, like John Taylor said before, it's not only the low-income households that are currently experiencing an unexpected significant blow to their finances. And that's illustrated by the figure on the right, which shows that in a lot of EU member states, the energy burden, so the relative cost of energy of the 20th richest households, has increased almost by the same extent as it has for the 20% poorest households. And this consequence kind of justifies broader support on the short term. Also, when using the same eligibility criteria all the time, this could cause a poverty trap, which means that your income counterintuitively drops at a certain point when you work more hours, which is also not ideal. And finally, two other disadvantages are the fact that it costs more to develop and improve targeted policies, and that it may be difficult to generate public support for a measure that only benefits a small segment of the population. And now over to Joanne for some concluding remarks.
Yeah, so now let me highlight some conclusion on my side. So as we saw from the first graph, member states have answered to the crisis with emergency measures resulting in important expenditures, but prices are expected to remain high in the coming years. So there is a need to plan the way forward. And so the OECD states that member states must move away from price support measures, which reduce the incentive for to lower the energy consumption, and which tend to disproportionately benefit to higher income households. However, a more targeted support approach should not overlook burdened medium income households, so which has been stressed by my colleagues previously. And the energy crisis could present an opportunity for member states to use it as a catalyst to accelerate renovation efforts. And now I give back the floor to Tyne.
Yeah, sorry, Julien, we have a couple of more slides on what social housing providers have done so far. and also what they could do in the future to mitigate the effects of the energy crisis and the forthcoming energy price volatility in the context of the energy transition. Together with two co-authors, Joris Hoekstra from TU Delft and Ute Dubois from ISG Paris, I've conducted 6 focus groups in the past months. And these were held at the offices of 6 major social housing providers, Paris Habitat and Polylogie in France, Clarion and Peabody in England, and IJmere and Havenstede in the Netherlands. And in these focus groups, participants from different departments, including asset management, finance, legal, but also the social teams, they were asked how their organization currently supports tenants at risk of energy poverty, and whether their organization could make more fundamental changes to their strategies in order to shield and protect their tenants in the long run. And we've listed only a couple of these to give an idea of what's currently being debated within these organizations, starting off with the short-term measures. So one that immediately comes to mind, because it's implemented quite broadly, especially in France, is energy coaching. This means sending energy coaches or energy mentors door to door, who then talk extensively with a tenant about the household's energy behavior and to give advice on how they could save energy and therefore also save money. This could mean switching off lights and heating when going to bed, or perhaps moving the sofa from the radiator so that the heat is distributed more efficiently. Personally, I'm volunteering as an energy coach 1 hour per week back in Amsterdam, and I could definitely recommend it. You learn more about energy efficiency, you help some people in need, you meet people outside of your bubble, which is always nice. And if you're interested, Housing Europe takes part in the PowerPort project and educates people to be an energy coach. I think this will be covered later on in the webinar. So behavior change is important, but it only gets you so far. And if people are to cut their energy use and benefit from lower bills in the long term, the energy efficiency of their homes needs to be improved as well. And on a small scale, this could be done by deploying so-called fixed teams, which has happened quite a lot in the Netherlands recently. And these fixed teams consist of handymen and women that take small-scale energy-saving measures, like weather strips or radiator foil. They also adjust the boiler so that it works more efficiently. And these measures can really make a big difference, especially when deep, large-scale retrofits are not planned on the short term. And the third and final short-term measure that we'd like to highlight is a real crisis measure, which is the setup of warm hubs. That's already happening in the UK. And warm hubs are communal places in which tenants gather so that they do not have to spend money on energy at home. They can enjoy a comfortable temperature there, but they're also provided with food, social activities when they are interested in that, and also some energy coaching. And warm hubs can be a particularly helpful solution in neighborhoods with social challenges or neighborhoods with lots of elderly, socially isolated tenants. And regarding the long-term measures they've been thinking about, one of these is the prioritization of retrofits there where they are most needed. We found that some social housing projects have gone beyond the pure business case approach to retrofit and have looked at neighborhood characteristics when deciding on their retrofit strategies. This would mean that a more deprived neighborhood gets the district heating first, rather than a more affluent neighborhood. And the potential of such prioritization is that your organization not only improves the energy efficiency of the stock, but at the same time brings about social inclusion and shields tenants at risk of energy poverty on the long term. Obstacles to this approach would be the lack of data to pinpoint and localize the risk of energy poverty, and broader cost efficiency pressures, like Bent has pointed out. Second structural approach would be changing rent setting, considering factors that exacerbate energy poverty. Could be based on the energy efficiency of a dwelling, so more asset-based, or even on the characteristic of a certain household, so more vulnerability-based. And while a lot of social housing providers definitely see the logic of lowering rents when there's a risk of energy poverty or capping rents, rent setting is of course heavily regulated as well in the countries we studied. However, they would like to explore the opportunities of this, and they state that there's already a mild lenient policy regarding rent arrears for households with tough financial situations. And third and finally, social housing providers could also change their allocation policy in a way so that they do not allocate the poorly insulated homes to low-income families, for instance. This approach would lower the risk of energy poverty at the very start of a tenancy. However, an obstacle is the limited influence on allocations, and another is the fact that there is not enough housing stock to be really picky in that respect. So that's where the housing crisis and the energy crisis really meet. Low-hanging fruit would be to provide more information to prospective tenants about their probable energy cost before they say yes to a rental property. So to wrap up, social housing providers in France, the UK, and the Netherlands have already taken a variety of short-term crisis measures to shield their tenants from energy poverty, but planning for long-term alleviation takes time, and there's a variety of obstacles that must be taken away. And if you would like more information or you have a question, please reach out to us personally. And then I give the floor back to you, Julien. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dane. Thank you very much, Joanne. That was very useful to have a broader and at the same time analytical view about the different measures at the governmental level, but also the typologies of action that social housing providers are putting in place. Now we want to hear directly from them, from the social housing providers. We want to hear about what is the current state of discussion about the challenges that they have to face, looking at the different elements, whether this is short-term, as I said, medium-term or long-term. All of this requires a series of conditions, whether it's funding, skills, or the adequate regulatory frameworks, and how to navigate around all this. This is the question I'd like to ask to a series of Housing Europe members coming from different countries. We'll hear from Austria, Spain, Estonia, Portugal, Ireland, and we're going to hear from a representative of the tenants, because at the end of the day, indeed, this is what matters, how tenants can benefit from all those actions. So I'm going first to ask Gerald Kösel from the Austrian Federation of Limited Profit Housing Associations to give us in 5 minutes a brief idea of what's the current state of discussion in Austria. So Gerald, welcome, good afternoon, and over to you.
Yeah, hello. I hope everyone can hear me well. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the situation in Austria, just very briefly. So the current crisis, I mean, all that has been said is definitely also true for Austria. Energy prices have been rising rapidly. So general inflation, so the CPI is at about 10% at the moment. Energy prices have increased by about 60% in the last year. So that's a considerable increase, but I think it's also important to see that, for example, even housing costs over the last years, because this is like a combination of crises, like a housing affordability crisis combined with now the energy crisis, and rent levels have been increasing, especially in the private rented sector, well above inflation actually over the last years. That has basically led to a situation now combined with the energy crisis where a lot of households are struggling. And there's now a quarterly survey, which is, I think, happening also in many other European countries, where basically the financial situation of households is tracked over time. And I've just been looking into some data on that, and you can really see now slowly the arrears, for example, are slowly increasing in all rental sectors. So both arrears on rents, but also on utility bills, especially. So you can really see now that that households are struggling, and especially when you also ask them how people are expecting to deal with the situation in the future, the situation looks a lot more bleak. Yeah, so that's what's happening on the sort of energy and the rental side. What's also, I think, important is that now what was quite recent phenomenon, just in the last quarter now, that the new rent sort of figures came out, which are published quarterly. You can see some of the rents, especially in the private rented sector, are linked to the CPI, to the consumer price index, and now actually rents are rising disproportionately. So that's becoming a real problem when rents are actually linked to inflation. And so the good thing in our sector, the limited profit housing sector, is that this is actually not the case, because of the cost rental system. Those rents actually linked to the financing conditions, and most of our members have taken up long-term sort of low interest rates, and so the impact of this sort of inflation crisis is definitely helped by sort of our sector at the moment, where the increases are relatively moderate compared to the private rented sector, where the increases are now basically at a record level, and that's gonna basically like a sort of impact again on the inflation. And then because inflation CPI is used as linked to rental calculations, it's then going to impact again on rental. So there's like a vicious circle that has basically been triggered by this high inflation. So yeah, that's roughly the situation on the rental market. There are obviously also some measures that have been mentioned already in Austria to try to alleviate some of the issues and the problems that households are facing, especially on the sort of one, I think, policy has been mentioned. In order to prevent evictions, a new policy has been implemented, which is basically one-off payments for households who cannot pay their rent, and also to support them to find a more affordable accommodation. So it's really the idea that it's not just about covering rental arrears, but also to find long-term sustainable solutions for households who would not be able to cover the rent payments in the long term. So that's called the housing umbrella, the Wohnschirm, and this has now been extended also to utility bills. So that the plan is that also utility bill arrears that households might face might be paid. But again, this is a measure that the idea is really to lead households into a sort of sustainable solutions, and not just to cover rental arrears or utility bills over a long period. Yeah, in terms of new construction, I think that's probably one of the areas where we see also quite an impact, because a lot of the new construction that's happening in our sector, you have a cost limitation on the construction costs. So and construction costs have increased, I think, about 28% compared to last year. And if you look only at the material cost within that index, you can actually see an increase of about 40%. So that's a significant challenge within our sector, given that there are sort of construction cost limits. Some of the regions who provide regional sort of subsidies, they have increased some of the subsidy levels. They have increased some of the construction cost levels to try to basically to keep the construction going. But yeah, we can see already a slight decline, probably not as much as we have feared, but there's definitely also an impact on new construction in our sector. I think that's probably most from my side.
Thank you very much. Just a question about the renovations, because indeed you mentioned new construction. Do your member organization signal a slowing down of renovations because of the current inflation on energy and material inputs? Have you heard about recent figures about that?
Well, the thing is, we've just published our sort of annual survey. I mean, that covers basically the time until the end of 21, so probably not the most recent developments. In there, we haven't seen any drop. In fact, renovations have increased slightly in 2021. And I can't give you exact figures about the latest developments on the renovations, but I think the bigger impact is really on new construction, where you have those limits. And in terms of renovation, I guess maybe our members are maybe a bit more flexible in terms of scheduling renovations at the right time, using some of their own equity to invest some of the maintenance and improvement fund that exists in Austria, basically where tenants pay into and save up money in the long term. So I think on the renovation side, we do not see a massive impact at the moment, but I think in terms of the new construction, there is definitely a higher impact.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very useful, and indeed the same question I'd like to ask to the other speakers. From Austria, we're going to Spain with Maria Montes, who is Vice President of the Spanish Association of Public Housing Providers. So Maria, welcome, and over to you also for 5 minutes, if it's fine for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate in this roundtable, which is, I think, we have the first, I think, on May, and this is an update of some of the questions we have discussing on May. First of all, I would like to stress that the social housing sector in Spain is a public sector, so it is very important because measures taken by the government, national government or regional government is very important, are very important for us. So because we operate under the public procurement rules and the public rules, so it is very important to have in mind that that we are public organization, not private, not with limited profits. So public organization. So depending on local or depending on local authorities or regional authorities. And having said that, first of all, concerning the increasing prices of raw materials, in May, the Spanish government approved a Royal Decree law which incorporates extraordinary measures to allow an exceptional review of the prices of public procurement contracts. So it is very important because our members of ABs, which have contract other companies, now they are able to review the prices of these contracts, of this construction contracts. So this measure was very important for us, but it is not enough in many cases because the increasing of raw materials, we think that in some cases are very high. So even with this measure, sometimes it is not enough for the review of the contract. So, but it was a good measures taken by the Spanish government. And concerning the increasing of energy cost, we can talk about two kind of measures taken by members of ABs and measures taken by the Spanish government. Concerning measures taken by ABs members, we are focused on improving the energy efficiency of community boilers in buildings. I don't know if you have the same systems in Europe. I think so, and we are making important investments improving in order to improve the energy efficiency of community boilers, and we are making training and dissemination campaigns concerning energy savings for tenants. So this is very important because the energy bill, we think that the high energy bills is because the prices of the energy is increasing, but many tenants or many consumers, they don't have enough information about the way to save energy consumption. So it is we are making some campaigns with information for tenants, and with brochures and with workshops with them, and in order to teach them to use the energy in their home. So this is an important measures taken by ADS members. And another one is the renovation projects that we are developing under the Next Generation Fund. So this is very important because many projects will have an important impact in the energy efficiency of the buildings. So this is another important measure for us. From the side of the government, we have a request to the Ministry of Ecological Transition for the creation of a new tariff for community boilers. This is not exactly a new tariff, but I try to explain that there is different tariff if you are an individual and if you are a SMEs or a big company, and the tariff in the community in the buildings with community boilers is like a big company, so the tariff is more expensive. So we have requests to the ministry that this kind of tariff must be changed because it's very expensive for tenants. So this is we have. So in October, finally in October, was approved a royal decree with this change. So the tariff of community boilers in buildings will be cheaper than before. And it is very important for the consumer, for the consumers, and for saving energy, for saving in the energy bills. So it's important for us. And as my colleague from France mentioned before, was talking before about the Iberian exception. As you know, it was a political agreement with the European Union in May, or I don't remember, in April or May. And the reality after these months is that it's very difficult to estimate the real saving with this Iberian exception. Experts talk about that the saving could be about the 13%. So, but it's very difficult to calculate the real saving with the Iberian exception in Spain and Portugal. So, and in the next slide, I think I can show you. This is what I have to mention. This is the letter that I'm sorry, but it is in Spanish. This is the letter that we sent to the Ministry of Ecological Transition in Spain, requesting for the change in this tariff in the buildings with community boilers. And in this next slide, I thought that it was an example of the brochure. Yes. I'm sorry, it's in Spanish, but this is an example of a brochure that we give to tenants, and in line with the speech of the speaker from the European Commission. So we use the message concerning solidarity. So your solidarity is important. So it's not only about, we are not talking about saving only on saving, but we are talking about solidarity. So it is important that all of us can pay the energy bill, and all of us can reduce the demand from energy. So this is the key message. The key message for us. And the other slide. Well, it is important. I think one of the key challenges for the future, at last in Spain, is to extend the lines of the execution of the Next Generation funds concerning the renovation of buildings, because we are. It's very difficult to get the objectives. And we need to extend the deadlines if we want to make a deep renovation of most of our buildings, and if we want to, our buildings could be energy efficiency, more efficient, and the tenants, and if we want to that and if we are looking for a more comfortable housing and dwellings for our tenants, it's very important to extend the lines of the Next Generation funds concerning renovation of buildings.
Thank you very much.
That's
Maria.
all.
Thank you. Indeed, important last point that you mentioned, because indeed, although in some countries like Austria, it's difficult. I mean, we cannot detect yet any slowing down of renovation. In other countries, there's already happening, and therefore it will take longer and will take require more money to indeed renovate homes. And this is also part of the challenges that social housing providers have to face in the coming months and years. We need to speed up a bit because we are already behind schedule. So I'm going to give the floor to Anu Sarnet from Estonia, so head of International Relations and Projects in the Estonian Union of Cooperative Housing Association. Anu, we've seen from the different statistic earlier this afternoon that Estonia is one of the countries where the inflation is at the highest level. So basic question is, how can you do to help your members tackling this very challenging situation? So thank you, Anu, and over to you.
Thank you, Julien, and thank you, Housing Europe, for organizing this event and facilitating this discussion. Very, very important topics. Yes, in Estonia, we are facing different challenges at the same time, but maybe it's opportunity to find new solutions for that as well. So I will start with construction and renovation prices. When we take the three main groups of construction prices, the labor, construction machinery, and material, there have been increase in all of these prices, but the most significant increase has been definitely in price of materials. So after Russia attacked Ukraine in March, there was a rise in price of wood or price of metal. And also there were delivery difficulties. Some materials ran out completely. For example, after March, there was a total deficit of cement in Estonia because it mostly came to Estonia from Russia or Belarus. So after the beginning of the war on Ukraine, the cost of construction and renovation has increased around 20%, and in some cases even 30%. And as a result, the rise in prices broke the budgets of construction companies, which now cause very heavy consequences on housing sector and renovation activities. So when it comes to apartment associations, some members of our federation, it of course causes a lot of troubles because we have to keep in mind that the apartment associations in Estonia are non-profit organizations. And when they plan the renovation project or renewable energy solution, they use bank loans, state grants, and own financing to collect exactly the sum of money needed for the investment. And it means that apartment associations in Estonia are extremely inflexible when it comes to ordering renovation works, and it's generally not possible to add price increases into their contracts. So we have collected some feedback from our members and found that the luckiest are these housing associations that signed their renovation contracts with construction companies before March this year. As several cases where the companies still were able to finish their jobs with the planned budget. But for all of the others, the solution in most cases is to postpone the renovation project and collect additional funds or cancel the project for unknown time. And I really see a paradox here because the homeowners now quit the investments into energy efficiency or renewable energy that would lower their energy costs because at now the times of turbulence, they prefer to use this money for living. They see this is more sustainable for their family to use this money for well-being that initially was planned for investments. And which brings us to the second point, the response to energy crisis. We saw from Dara's presentation that it's predicted that the energy poverty level in Estonia will jump significantly in coming times. And I believe it's so, but at the moment, according to our statistics and information, the energy poverty in Estonia is still very much hidden. Because when we look at the areas of utility bills, we can't see much problem yet, partly because of the temporary subsidies to the consumers, and partly because people are used to pay their bills. But it means that the money must come from other sources, which were not initially planned for that. And if you add the high inflation rate in Estonia, it's clear that the cost of living is extremely high and really unpredictable how much more it will increase. So how Estonia addresses the situation? We have the temporary subsidies, as I mentioned, to mitigate the effects of rising energy prices. These are untargeted subsidies to all the consumers. Then Estonia has established so-called universal service, which means an opportunity created by the state to buy electricity at the regulated price in the following 4 years. And it's intended for home consumers and for those who mediate electricity to home consumers, like apartment associations or management companies. Then Estonia is preparing new financing programs. This is something where our organization is also participating in consultations. So the new regulations should come out the next year, and it would allow apartment associations to apply for a state grant for renovation. Depending on the region, Estonia has defined vulnerable regions and less vulnerable regions. So the grant will be 30 to 50% of the renovation project cost. What is more positive is that there has never been so much discussions or renewable energy communities in Estonia than now, because people are realizing that there is opportunity how to lower the energy costs in the future. But unfortunately, there are a lot of challenges because the electricity network or the grid is not really ready to use this distributed electric generation opportunities. And there is a lot of work to do, but the idea is that the future could be producing your own energy is maybe one of the solutions. And what we are doing and our partners are doing in Estonia, we are raising awareness on energy saving and energy efficiency. We have a national program, Buildest, where we introduce opportunities for energy efficiency renovations. And we also have our energy mentors in the network of PowerPool, where we have people consulting households and families how they can save energy and what they can do right now, even if they don't have money for investments. And this is something we see really positive, where we can see really positive side, because people are really interested in energy savings and they are looking for opportunities to save their cost and maybe to find opportunities to new investments, to maybe look further, not only the next month where the prices are really high, maybe to survive, but already think about the next years, what to do, how to produce their own energy, or what to do next. So we can see really new opportunities here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very good to end with a note of optimism around the production of energy. And indeed, this is something that socializing and cooperative and public housing providers in Europe are really looking at increasingly. The renewable energy communities, the opportunity to do self-consumption of renewable energy are certainly a crucial element for the future to be taken into account. So from Estonia, we're going back to the south of Europe, Portugal. We have two presentations from Portugal, one from João Carvajosa, the head of strategic planning at Gebalis, the public housing agency in Lisbon, and from Carlos Prata from Matosinhos Habitat, another city in Portugal. First, João, could you tell us in a nutshell what the current challenges are for your organization and how to navigate around this multiple challenges? So, João, the floor is yours.
Hello, Julia and everybody. So, hello from Lisbon. Well, I'll structure this presentation in 4 points, 4 brief points: loans, rental market, and construction sector and energy crisis. Just let me put here okay. So about loans, well, and I'll structure these 4 points in 2 issues: the problems and then the measures that have been taken either by the central government or by our municipality in this case. So in the loans, the problems is that the housing loans repayments are rising. Euribor tax is expected to rise up to 3% in 2023, which make the monthly payments from the families back to the banks rise from an average of 279 to 371 euros, which means about 35% increase in the mortgage repayments. And this will affect 84.9% of the contracts, as they have a variable rate linked to Euribor. There was a peak of loans in 2007 with 19 billion euros, then fall to 1.9 billion, so almost 10% in 2012, and in 2021 it was 50 billion euros of loans related to houses, to buy houses. Today there are about 1.43 million housing loans, which represents a debt to the banks of 101 billion euros from the families. So the measures that the government has been taken is to force the banks to renegotiate the loans if the effort tax is bigger than a certain amount, depending on the household situations. So banks can propose a refinancing, an extension of the loan, of the time of the loan, a change of type of tax, etc. About the rental market, well, there is about 900,000 rental contracts. These rental contracts would rise 5.43% in 2023, as the index is linked with inflation. In just to give you the idea, in 21 the increase was 0.43%, and in 2020 was zero. An average rent per square meter rose at national level by 16.3% in the last 12 months to 12.5 euros per square meter, with some districts in Portugal rising 35% the rent per square meter. In Lisbon, the increase of the rents of the price of the new contracts in the last 12 months was 29.3% to 17.3 euros per square meter. So the measures the government has restricted the increase of the rents to 2%, so it will not be 5.43, but it will be only 2%. So there's a cap for this, and they will give a fiscal benefits to landlords to compensate the difference. In Lisbon, the municipality has frozen the increase of social rents and will give up to 1,000 rent subsidies to households. And there is also a social emergency fund in Lisbon, which is managed by the municipality and the other small local authorities, that could give up to 1,500 euros per year per household. And this fund can also be used in paying rents that the households have some difficulty to pay. In the construction sector, well, the problems is that the housing construction is at a halt, as the price of the materials rose by 18.6% and the construction costs by 13.4%. So what the consequence of this is that the public procurement bids have no response from the builders, as many of them were prepared before the rise of inflations and material costs. So there's a lot of bids in public procurement that simply have no answer from the construction side. Materials like ceramics rose 80%, and cement, wood, copper, and aluminium 20%. So, and there is also a lack of workers in construction companies to answer to the demand of the next years. The measures, well, there is not a lot of big measures in the sector, but the government will invest 3.4 billion euros in construction, which of them 573 million are for affordable housing. And they expect to build, rehabilitate, or acquire about 26,000 new houses to social or affordable housing. In the energy crisis, and this is the last point, well, there has been an increase of the price up to 10%. For consumers, it's about 7.8 euros per 100 kilowatt hour, but electricity remains stable and is now at 0.15 euros per kilowatt hour, which is a quite lower price than the rest of Europe. And the gas for production of electricity is nowadays in 31.8 euros per megawatt hour. Well, what the measures have been taken by the government is the tax paid on electricity decreased from 39 to 24%, and in gas from 36 to 27%, with benefits for low-income households. And there's a possibility to change to the gas regulated market for those households consuming less than 10,000 cubic meters per year of gas. And in fuel, there's also a reduction of taxes to mitigate the increase of prices. That's it.
Thank you very much, João. Now, I'd like to hear from Carlos Prata from Matosinhos Habitat to have a complementary view on the situation in Portugal. Carlos, welcome.
Yes, Julian.
The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to share just a moment to share. a moment.
And while you are searching, just,
okay.
Okay. Yeah.
No,
Okay.
it's
Yeah,
okay.
Good.
Okay. First of all, thank you for this opportunity. I would like to. Portugal is very well represented for my previous speaker, João from Gebali. Gebali is just to make a small introduction. Gebali is similar to our institution. We are much a bit from the north of Portugal. Not so big as Gebali, but we do the same proposal. And I just like to share three situations that are very preoccupation for us and for social housing. And one thing is we do the improvement of the building, so we make renovations, big renovations. And we isolate the buildings and we prepare them for good and bad weather. But then and now more recent, we have the big problem that is the cost of the energy. I think it's similar to every speaker talks about this. And this difficult what we felt is that the houses we are preparing, they are better. But then people don't have enough money to support to make them comfortable because of the price of the energy. Okay, we can talk about also about the cost of the materials that are high. I will not talk about that because my colleagues, the other speakers, talk about that. I will only focus on the cost of the energy, okay, and of the cost of making the buildings a little bit more with more quality. And that is my second point. Energy poverty is this that I'm sharing with all of you. And of course, the high inflation rate that everyone felt that, and the people that live in social housing are even the ones that most feel this problem. So what I would like to, and I will not be, I will not take too much time, but I would like to share this with all of you. As Maria from Spain also talked about this, is the problem of the high price of the energy. So what can we do to help people that live in social housing so they can afford the huge effort that the city halls do in renovation the buildings and give them more quality in their life? Okay, with this from the north of Portugal is this my contribution is to our conference, and thank you to all.
Thank you very much, and indeed that was very important to mention the point which we can find in other countries, particularly, but also quite strikingly in Portugal. Now we're going to end our little tour of Europe with Ireland, with Owen Carroll from the Cooperative Housing Ireland. So Owen is going to tell us indeed what's the situation in the cooperative, in housing cooperative sector in Ireland regarding the current crisis, and how your members are facing this in terms of short-term measures, but also the long-term perspective and long-term solutions. So Owen, welcome, and over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Julian. I'm just going to try and find my presentation. I'll do it this way around, which will mean that I'll okay. It's interesting how you get used to one technology in the form of Teams, and then
sorry, we changed Zoom this time.
Yeah, no, it's my
if
bad.
you need some help, we can maybe ask Abdul.
Yeah.
Oh, no, okay, it's fine. It's going. Yeah, okay,
cool. So listen, I know we're tight on time. So we were asked to keep to one slide, and yeah, just actually, first of all, I'd like to say thanks to everyone on the contribution, and in particular to Tin and Joanne, because I think some of their short-term and long-term recommendations from their own research will be something that I'd look to feed back to our members in terms of some very practical measures. So thank you both for your presentation. In terms of the impact that it's having on delivery of homes, just in the year that has passed, the output would be 13.5% less than what was planned, and that's due to shortage of material and increased costs. And looking to next year, with increases in interest rate, there will be further pressure on the construction of social housing. In particular, rate changes on loans. And so our members, we would have access to preferential loan rates, but still relative to other European countries, 3% is particularly high for a 25-year loan. There's also the question around viability of schemes, both because of the material cost and material inflation, as other speakers have spoken about, but now in terms of wage inflation and an understandable need for wage increases, but then the knock-on effect that will have in terms of the delivery of homes. Then in terms of my presentation, we see that consumer prices have increased dramatically in Ireland. We've now surpassed countries such as Sweden, Finland and Luxembourg in terms of the price of some basic basket of goods, and even in terms of bread and milk, which I think Irish people have a love affair with cow's milk. But again, huge increases in terms of the basics. In terms of recent studies nationally, you can see there that nearly everybody is concerned, and majority of people see that they are now worse off in terms of living condition, and we see a growing number of households that don't have enough money in terms of their monthly spend. In terms of mitigation and mitigation on behalf of the state, we see that there has been double payments, double social welfare payments. So everything from children's allowance, which would be a universal payment to all citizens, all families. But also in terms of other welfare payments to those who are unemployed. And we also see that there is energy credits. Again, this is to all households and a universal payment. And it's again interesting and to see the research that Tin and Joanne have done around the implications of intervention that's not targeted. So I'll be interested to review that further. There's also been a commitment not to cut energy supply. However, and this is a concern that we would have for many of our members who have a prepay system. So you would add credit. If people think of their mobile phones, you add credit to your heating. And that once that credit is gone, your heating cuts off. So to mitigate this, they've allowed for an additional €20 credit as an emergency credit. But again, if that emergency credit is used up, I think there's no further recourse. And so we would certainly be encouraging our members to move on to other plans, other energy plans, which may result that they enter debt and are indebted to an energy provider, but that is better than not having any electricity. at all. There's also been, in like many countries, a ban on evictions within the private rental sector and rent caps on rent increase. However, for people taking out new leases, that restriction is not really there, and we see hyper-normative rents really in the private rental sector. I've said this before, certainly people live in social housing in Ireland are protected, and rents are very much benchmarked off household incomes, so that's less of a threat for people in social housing. The long term, we see that greater need for retrofitting, and certainly retrofitting programs are being rolled out. Again, it was interesting to hear Tin and Joanne's presentation. Our approach has been to look at the stock condition as opposed to maybe the household income, and targeting the older stock. It's possibly it would be less of an issue in that we wouldn't have the income distribution within social housing that you would have perhaps in other countries. But it was an interesting point that they made, and I appreciated that one. There was references earlier on to district heating, community heating, community boilers, and certainly in Ireland that has been a challenge for many social housing providers because their rates are on a commercial rate, and interestingly enough, commercial rates increased disproportionately higher than residential rates. So that has been a challenge, and it is resulted in consultation with state officials. And then lastly, to end on a positive note, perhaps, with the introduction of deep energy retrofit programs, we have been and heat pumps and the various equipment that goes with heat pumps. We've been producing videos for members on how to operate their heat pumps and ways to operate them in an energy efficient way. So perhaps by accident, because it wasn't necessarily by design in terms of addressing the energy crisis, but by accident, that has been a positive contribution. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Owen. Indeed, yeah, it's good to finish by a note of optimism and to look at the potential solutions, even from the market providers. We hope that solutions like heat pump, but also like PV panels, will be in the future fit for providing affordable solutions to the provision of electricity. This is something that indeed the whole sector of social, cooperative, and public housing is looking for in a very enthusiastic way. So we're going to now to pass the floor to a representative of the International Union of Tenants, Chiara Massarotto. Chiara, you've heard about what's going on from the point of view of social, cooperative, and public housing providers in Europe in terms of strategies to cope with different crises. So what's your view? What more needs to be done in order to make sure that tenants are not left behind? So over to you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me well. So yes. I was given this slot precisely for bringing the tenant's perspective as well to this roundtable, and I will be really short, I swear. I don't have any slides, so I will be straightforward. So definitely tenants are the ones at the forefront of the housing and energy crisis. They are now facing huge increases in rents as well and energy costs, but they don't have enough social safeguards to protect them. So today I would like just briefly to share with you a plan that was developed by the International Union of Tenants. And it's a plan for the protection, of course, of tenants. It's based on different objectives, but overall, it really aims at preventing the housing crisis to continue. So the housing costs like rents and energy to rise further. And I'm really happy because today a lot of the points were already mentioned. Some of them apparently are included in the recent declaration mentioned by Mr. Taylor, by DG Just. And also were touched upon many of the speakers. So this is really good. So the first point would really be to have laws on rent stabilization and controls, since law, of course, is the most important thing. And having these kind of laws would ensure security of tenure, would prevent indexation of rents, like the ones that are happening, for example, now in Brussels, and would limit rent increases in general. And this is especially needed in the private rental sector because, of course, today we are between social housing providers, but not all the tenants have this lack to be housed in social housing. So regulating the private market is really, really crucial. And also as a short-term measure that was also mentioned today, it would be important to insert a price cap for consumers' energy consumption. But instead, as a long-term measure, the use of climate housing allowances would help. These are means for long-term compensation for increases in energy costs that would be delivered to low but also middle-income households. By using both national public funding and also by being complemented by EU funds. So hopefully the EU Social Climate Fund will become available soon, but also a revenue could be the excessive profit tax. And just to mention that this is possible because this has been done just a few weeks back in Germany, so it could be easily replicated also elsewhere. Another point I would like to mention, and this also was touched upon before, it's the possibility of inserting moratoria on evictions. It was done already during the pandemic, and this would really protect tenants and keep them in their house, but also the moratoria on energy cutoffs and disconnections, because nobody should be left at cold and nobody should be left at dark. This is essential. But going back really to the European level and also to the so-called renovation wave, to have socially sustainable renovations, it's really important that the principle of housing cost neutrality is implemented. This means that any increase in rent is at least fully balanced by energy saving. So in this way, at least we avoid additional economic burdens on tenants. And we also prevent what we call renoviction. So these are eviction by renovation or like general displacement of residents before, during, or after renovation. So the plan also tackles the issue of energy poverty and the issue also of tenants' participation in democracy. But just really to be brief today, the last point I would like to touch upon is the need for more transparency in the rental sector. So the need to avoid extra charge in billing information for tenants, as this is already the case for landlords. And yes, I will maybe link the plan to the chat and also leave my contact so that everybody who's interested could reach out. And I will maybe just take these last few seconds to say that on behalf of IoT, we would really like to call on all the actors, member states, institutions, housing providers to go for these claims. Because we are really ready and happy to work together and to ensure better social protection and a fair energy transition as well. So thank you very much for giving me the floor. I hope I was short enough.
Thank you, Chiara. Well, no, that was perfect. And I'm sure the participant would like to have on paper more details about the plan that you just presented to us. Clearly, tenants are necessary and strong partners in the fair energy transition, but also in the emergency situation that we are facing in at the moment. So that's obviously something we want to strengthen in the future. So thanks, thank you, Chiara, and thank you to all the speakers from the different corners of Europe. That was very useful, and you will find the recording of the session on YouTube while it's live streamed. So now we have a bit of a challenge that we need to slowly but surely wrap up the session, and we're going to give the floor to my colleague Jean Gonsalves, our project officer or project manager, who are going to have a short insight into what kind of solutions we can put in place while maintaining the focus on the fair energy transition that we indeed need and that we were talking about. So Jean, floor is yours.
All right, thanks a lot, Julien. I hope you already can see my presentation.
Yes.
All right, so yeah, I have about 10 minutes to speak. Try to add a bit more, in terms of innovative measures taken from the wealth of information that we are collecting from the European Affordable Housing Consortium. We are talking about mostly pilot projects that can serve as a good example to be replicated across Europe. And I will also, as a background to all these measures that we have been hearing, the importance also not to forget the wider context of planning, of thinking well, what we need to do in this fair energy transition in housing as well. So this is just a news, just to illustrate the need to be careful about the choices that we make. Indeed, we have seen by Dara's presentation what it means in terms of the rise of cost of living across Europe. And we have seen that the government's response has been quite varied. But in this case, the UK seems to have been struggling with their climate pledges and chosen some, I can say, some easiest solution for the energy crisis. In this case, it's a coal mine to operate for 50 years to supply steel makers in Europe. This is a choice that obviously has some consequences in terms of the fair energy transition. So basically, this is, I will try to skip a bit this slide, just to mention that we are, as a backdrop, we have a number of challenges in housing, and of course, including the environmental sustainability and now the energy crisis. So basically, this means that we have to take some choices. So managing these tensions in housing, we can focus on some things that we can actually control, and one of those things is innovation. So what can we do differently to try to not only in the short term, but especially on the long term, carry out the best solutions to avoid the situation in the future, to be more independent in terms of Europe, or even in terms of our social housing stock. And when we are talking about innovation, we're not only talking about technical, but also social innovation, funding, and business models, so that we can make the best use of the limited capital that we are giving. And hopefully we will have more capital in the future to face these challenges as well. And so the choice is between these quick fix solutions to the housing crisis, to create, or to actually develop the short-term measures, but with a longer-term perspective, so a longer-term planning. And I think we have already heard a lot of these measures already. And this longer-term perspective, what does it mean? It means that we should think in an integrated way. So what kind of houses do you need to build? Where, who should build them? And will the resident have a saying? For example, we know that some choices, for example, in building or renovating houses in the centers, add quality services and public transportation in that vicinity. Basically, we have two paths, and I hope we can choose the second and not repeat the mistake that the British government has chosen to take. So we already have seen some consequences of this short-term decision in the past. Even though they're well-intentioned, they have brought some ill-fated consequences for the people that were called to live there. So my first message is not to avoid this more narrow perspective of the lack of decent housing, or in this case, lack of affordable pricing in our houses that can carry out. And we have, contrary to these solutions, we also have other solutions that have been taking place in the last decades or in the last years that we think are something that can be followed. So this is one of the examples, comes from Dublin. We also heard from Ireland. So this is also from Ireland. It's called Sean Tracy House in Dublin, and basically this is a new development, or a redevelopment to be precise, to replace a number of derelict 1960s flat blocks, and they made it in a way to ensure, for example, a shared and secured garden for the residents and children. They also have some architectural options that have provided increased energy efficiency, so wind shelter, sunlight penetration, and passive solar gains. And they also have used some state-of-the-art technologies to lower energy use and carbon emissions. Some other perspectives here of the facade of this new buildings and the difference between the front facade and the interior patio. So this is the kind of examples that they both deal with the same concern, the lack of quality houses in the cities, for example, but they ended up having quite different results. So the message here is to also consider, so what kind of short-term measures can we take without jeopardizing this integrated approach that I'm advocating for, and that we need in these very difficult but still transitional and defining times. Basically, some of these short-term measures have been already mentioned here. So, I will go through them, and of course, the first one would be to create these energy poverty alleviation offices. So this example comes from Tallinn, Estonia. They opened this office to provide free of charge consultations to whoever is seeking to spend less while maintaining their heat comfort in their houses. We know about, my colleague from Estonia mentioned, the snowstorm they're having at the moment must be quite difficult to maintain heat comfort while not spending the whole of their salary. And they also have, quite interestingly, these mentors, individuals that help the residents take decisions on energy saving measures, short-term, long-term. It really depends on their choice. Another option, obviously, is to create self-consumption communities like this one in Pinerolo, Italy. So in this case, they have made two apartment blocks completely self-reliant in terms of energy water. So we can imagine that this crisis has been quite insulated for them. So they have included a number of technologies to make this happen, including a ventilated facade system, a heat pump, PV on the roof. And also the residents are able to monitor and fine-tune their production consumption via a building management system that is also implemented in these two buildings. Of course, if we do have a bit more time, we can start planting the seeds for these future buildings in the future. This is one example very close here to Brussels, the social energy sprung in Belgium. So this actually took years and years in the planning, but they also have this building carbon neutral by using prefabricated facades and roofs to allow energy demand reduction of 50% and reducing costs of 80%. So this is the kind of long-term planning that we need to see to face the results now, whenever we have this crisis in the future. Also, we have from Brussels this factory that was transformed into a 42 middle-income rental housing. So this is quite centralized as well, former industrial area. And you can see in the picture, they created a quite nice small neighborhood while still maintaining some industrial heritage remains. And last but not least, we can also start looking at even more creative projects. And this is basically a work in the procurement context. Basically, this is from Sweden. So they wanted to renovate social housing district as well, but they chose to include in the procurement procedures the obligation to have the individuals of that neighborhood to also have a work placement. Obviously, unemployed individuals to be offered work placement with the contractor of that renovation. And those workers, those residents, were mentored by experienced Svenska workers. So at the same time, they were able to participate in the renovation of their own district and get some valuable experience in a sector that has been lacking skills in Sweden as well. This is all part, as I said, of a wider project that we are developing. So basically, part of that project is drafting together blueprints of these successful examples, trying to make it, to transform those examples into guidelines that everyone can follow. We are almost finishing a first draft of this first document, and we would like to invite you all to participate in the feedback workshops that we'll be organizing in February. So you have the opportunity to read the document and tell us what you would like to change, what you would like to add in terms of practices, in terms of good examples, in terms of guidelines, anything that could help make this document more useful for the end user. So the social organizations, the municipalities, private companies, construction cluster, all those actors that are part of the renovation effort. I will also leave this presentation so you have the links there, so you can register online for the feedback, or at least get to know the agenda of these 3 feedback workshops that we're organizing on the February of next year. Yeah, so we will try to answer some of the questions that you have there on the screen. So if I want to undertake a more circular approach to my renovation works, what can I do? What is the first step? So what is a good guidance to help me carry out that circular approach? Within this consortium, we're also open to support any of the actors across Europe that would like to be to receive this information, or to get first-hand support from our pool of mentors. We can also register there in this link that you have there in our website, shapeaffordablehousing.eu. And we're also asking for experts and good examples like the ones I mentioned in this presentation. So thanks very much. Thank you for your time. Hope it's been useful, and do get in touch with us to participate in this project or to receive support firsthand from our experts. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Joao. So Julian had to step out, and I would just like to ask Martin Willemat if he would. I realize the time has run over a little bit, but if you still have time to react.
Hi everyone. Hi Sorka. Yeah, thank you very much.
Hi.
Thanks for having me, and thank you for this this very interesting meeting with a lot of insights. So my name is Martin Willemat. I'm working in the European Commission in DG GROW in the social economy unit, and notably on the affordable housing initiative that Joao has just mentioned, which has one of its action, which is this European Affordable Housing Consortium. As we are running a bit late, I had plenty of stuff to say, but I will keep it quite short. I think in view of the ongoing energy crisis, it's also very much important to mention that there was already this housing crisis existing before the conflict in Ukraine. So there's really, for the European Union and for all the stakeholders, kind of a twofold objective. To make sure that we actually increase the stock of affordable housing, but also renovate for better energy performance the existing stock. And this is definitely one of the objectives of the European Union. As we have heard from the different colleagues during this roundtable, the situation in member states is very varied. So we have some sectors and countries where the cooperative sector is very much involved, some others where it's actually subcontracting from public authorities. And we have seen notably in the discussion in a directive that the European Union is working on the energy performance of buildings, that the position of member states were really different. So the housing and social housing and affordable housing is not a competence of the EU, but there's a lot of instruments that the EU can actually do with direct management, but also via the member states. I think what is of paramount importance is to look at the issue of the ongoing crisis and the housing crisis in a comprehensive way. So really, this also echoed the long-term and the short-term approach that a lot of our colleagues have mentioned during this meeting. I think it's also very much of importance to have a cross-sectorial approach to make sure that we don't work in silo, but that actually the different stakeholders working in the different entities, not on the same issues, are actually brought together via matchmaking sessions, but via different European projects as well, to make sure that these good practices can actually be replicated. This is one of the issues at the EU level. There is much of good initiatives, of money flowing, but sometimes we actually repeat, and we are actually very challenged to put these replication potential to the best way possible. I was, for instance, thinking about Brussels, which is actually now freezing the rents for the dwellings, which actually are very poorly performing in terms of energy. This can't be done everywhere due to different situations. This is a very good example. We have another one, which is also from Belgium, which is called the Materiothek, and which is kind of a shop where actually a social economy shop where you can find any types of materials for the construction. And these materials, I mean, they can come from the deconstruction of existing projects, and they are supported by specialized consultancies, but can also come from any gift from mainstream construction shop which is actually closing. So those solutions can really help. I'm here on behalf of the European Commission, so we really try to speak with one voice, but in my DG, so the DG Grow for Enterprise and SMEs, we really support the renovation towards better energy efficiency for 4 reasons. The first one is obvious, is really to address the energy poverty. We have heard from colleagues that it's not only about most vulnerable and poor, I mean, not poor, but low income household, but also middle income, which is a challenge. But the second reason is that this renovation benefits the ecosystem, the construction ecosystem, and gives work to those SMEs. The third objective really lies in the social economy and the proximity economy that actually represents, so cooperative social housing providers, creative and cultural industries, but also reuse. We have talked about the solar panels. We know that there is now a kind of the end of the first generation of panel. There's a huge potential to actually recycle those solar PVs. And then the fourth objective, it's quite obvious, but as I said, referring to this comprehensive approach, we need to look at the issue with the global picture. If we spend more energy and electricity, but also water, because we always talk about these, but any kind of utility in the building sector and in affordable and social housing, it also leaves these utilities for other sectors which are desperately in need, because we can't really increase the production of electricity and energy as much as we can if we keep with the same rhythm. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I'll let Soka know telling me what you are expecting from the Commission and the EU decision makers.
Thanks a lot, Martin. I think you mentioned the word replication, and João showed us some of the examples that are indeed being implemented of district inclusive integrated renovation that do exactly and achieve the exact goals of the fair energy transition that we talk about at European level, that we continuously hear Commissioner Timmermans talking about, an energy transition that leaves nobody behind. And João showed quickly some of those examples. And I would say we can replicate those. We can, with the right policies, we can make that the norm in Europe. We can make that the norm for all Europeans. And these workshops, indeed, I would really welcome everyone who is on this call and the network to join in the sessions coming up in February, because what we will be doing is saying, what do we need to be able to replicate that district inclusive energy transition? I think these are the type of projects that are being realized that can really give hope in this time of crisis. My key thought coming away from all of the presentations today is indeed the famous Gandhi quotes of the true measure of any society can be found at how it treats its most vulnerable. And we hear from many of our colleagues working on the ground, not only in the social housing sector, but also working in shelters, working with homeless, working with asylum seekers. And those are the voices that need to be heard, a top priority also at European level. And this is why we welcome very much the session that was called together by the European Commission on the 7th of November, when they called an emergency roundtable to hear from stakeholders, okay, what are your issues? What do you need to help you with your work on the ground to make this a fair energy transition, to protect the most vulnerable? And as a result of that roundtable, we see this agreement this week with energy producers. Okay, it's not perhaps the solution to everything, but it's a step in the right direction. So we see when we are open to hear from those stakeholders on the ground, what type of progress we can make. And I think that's why today's session was actually a follow-up to that, because we wanted to hear, okay, what are those organizations on the ground? Are the measures that have been put in place helping them to help the most vulnerable? Are they helping them to continue with the energy transition? And it was contrasting news we heard. So in some countries, we heard quite good measures being put in place to make sure the renovation wave can continue, to make sure the most vulnerable are protected. But obviously, it's not uniform. But that's why these sessions are so important. We can, for instance, we heard from Spain how the government has stepped in to compensate for higher prices for construction materials, whereas we heard the big risk in Estonia of projects being put on hold, where the finance, which was actually meant for renovation, is now being used for basic day-to-day survival. So we can really feed off each other, learn from each other, and how we can bring the most vulnerable through this transition. And from EU level, again, so many of these issues have to be dealt with at national level, but we did hear also some recommendations around the Next Generation EU deadline. So we heard from Maria the need to take into account the reality of the situation for the social housing providers there. And I suppose this would apply to all of the EU financing instruments, that there is a reality check, that they listen to those organizations that are making this transition happen, that are protecting the most vulnerable, and that they adapt their tools. So I know, for instance, the need to keep on constructing social housing, coupled with the need to renovate, means that multiple loans are being taken out. We need more guarantees so that those loans can be taken out for renovation, so that the high interest rates is not stopping the energy transition. So potentially more guarantee funds, and obviously at EU level could help, and obviously more increased level of subsidies. So this double challenge of keeping construction going while we keep renovation going means that subsidies, any assistance on loans is really welcome. So if EU instruments can be adapted to compensate for this inflation in the social housing, cooperative housing sector, I think this can really give an added value. So yes, to sum up, I think this is just the first of the session. This crisis is ongoing. We saw the statistics earlier on. We cannot sit back and sit this out, wait it out, the words that Dara used. This is not a crisis that can be simply sat out. And I think what gave me a lot of hope is that we see multiple actions on the ground. Tyne also outlined the outreach actions, the direct assistance to vulnerable consumers in their homes, giving them advice, also urgent renovation in the most inefficient homes. So we have a very bleak outlook. Let's face it, a very bleak outlook when we look at the charts, when we look at the inflation, when we look at the economic outlook. However, what we hear today gives a lot of hope. There are actions going forward on the ground, outreach, support to those in need. So what we need to do is just figure out how can we support those measures on the ground that are crucial for the resilience of our society. And I think local level has a role to play, social housing providers, national level, but also the EU. So yes, we just have to keep our ears open, keep exchanging, and keep our focus on making sure that the most vulnerable are not the ones that suffer from this crisis. So thank you everybody for taking part today. We've run over time. but I think it was really worth it. We have a lot of excellent content and ideas. And yes, let's keep the conversation open, Martin.
Indeed. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot to everybody. And if we don't see you before the end of the year, I hope you can have a relaxing time in that period with your family.
Thank you. Enjoy the holidays.
Thanks a lot.